Okay. H, where are you? Who's H? Okay, hello. All right. So, one of my favorite stories by H is a small one. It's about a boy navigating loneliness through online gay porn involving spectacularly older men. And it was good stuff. Now, I think that's what it was about. So it was a while ago. But my memory is not great, but it's not as bad as I pretend it is. I just don't trust it because I'm a writer. And writer imagination stay cranked. I have a hard time knowing if the thought is a memory, dream, fiction, or prophecy. And for that reason, H's actual thesis feels familiar. The manuscript is not about old men kissing, unfortunately. It's actually a fantasy about merging realms, worlds of dragons, not sexy dragons, just good old dragons breathing good old fire, alongside clumsy necromancers, gender fluid reapers leading souls to the grave, and ambitious ordinary folk who dream of being high-class wizards. It's pretty much what my 20s look like. I've gotten to the point where I've started identifying students by their recurring characters or titles of stories that linger. I'll forget a name, but I remember a title. So years from now, at some random alumni networking event, I might spot H hovering over a tray of lemon bars and think geriatric gay porn, which is fine. Or I'll have a vision of his thesis character Mal, a gloomy, buoyant, weary, lonely, neurotic harbinger of death with OCD, which is also fun. So for now, let us welcome H. Bryan as he ushers us into the world of Reaper.
Okay, so starting off, I want to give my thanks, and my glasses are going to sign off my face a lot, unfortunately. So first off, I want to thank Venita, my thesis chair, and of course my committee members, Brenna and Dr. Renee. I want to thank my cohort members, Stefan, Shannon, and Falk, who are also all incredibly talented people. I want to thank everyone at the Writing Center, but especially Dr. Crisco, Courtney, and Tamara. And I, of course, want to thank my partner, Adrian, who's always a great support. This week's been really stressful for me, so I also just want to thank everyone for coming out. But to introduce the chapter that I'm reading, I will be focusing on Mao, who is one of the two main characters of this thesis. In this section of the thesis is before the two main characters met, so we only really didn't know about Mao. But they are investigating a mystery in which there have been several people who have died, but their souls are missing. So I will just dive into it. Of the several locations Mao could investigate listed on the file, they decided to look at the college. Partly, this was their own personal curiosity. The Wizarding College of Aurum University was newly founded when they were still alive. The buildings making up the college are grand stone affairs made of volcanic rock. Sorry about that. Several Mao believed they were the administrative and living quarters, could be described as towers as appropriate for wizards. The highest capped by a cone roof, which stood out from the rest of the city. This had been a small town until someone found gold nearby. It was valuable for magic, for money, for appearances. Now the city was like a vast anthill, people going to and fro, machines that would take crowds of people from places to places on tracks. Sometime between their death and the modern world, someone figured out how to get magic to stay inside objects for long periods of time. And that has allowed for all kinds of interesting contraptions. Mao wished they got to stay on the surface longer to study them, but unfortunately as a Reaper, they only got to encounter things during work. The college itself was an example of change. Before the university, wizards had to be apprenticed. Usually that meant you had to be a noble, as only they could afford the amount of gold needed to catch an uninterested wizard's attention. As a child, Mal had simply gotten lucky that the wizard who taught them took pity on an orphaned kid, and for that they will always be thankful, even if in some ways magic did lead to their death. They chose to manifest their form on the edge of campus, between the quiet of the old buildings and the light of the city, invisible and intangible to anything living. Locked rooms and closed-off areas would not be an issue for Mal, but that also meant they couldn't ask anyone for directions or speak with any witnesses. That always made investigating interesting. As they floated further in the campus, immediately Mal noticed that bright colors seemed to be in fashion for wizards again, much to their internal annoyance. They thought the amount of what they considered to be obnoxiously bright or clashing colors was ridiculous. Personally, Mal had always favored simple black robes, although they would be the first to admit that wizards of their time were equally unfashionable, with a particular fondness for oversized hats. Mal pushed that train of thought aside and looked around for anything particularly important. They were in the middle area of campus, a kind of mini park with a fountain and benches and flowers. So far, they hadn't noticed anything closed off or signs of obvious struggle. They could search the entire campus, but given how many buildings there were, that wasn't ideal. But Mal assumed that if someone had died on campus, people would be talking about it. People living or dead were terribly gossipy. This would be easier if they could talk to living authorities, but they, like most reapers, are barred from knowingly interfering with the lives of the living. They looked over the closest buildings, enchantment, administration, and history. It didn't seem to be anything here. Mal saw no signs of anything being roped off or people gawking. After several hours of wandering, Mal overheard a conversation. Did you hear about the groundskeeper? There was a subtle tone to the words that tipped them off. It was more about the groundskeeper speaker. The speaker, a woman in all pink, just didn't want to say out loud. To Mal's amusement, the person she attempted to say this to had already left without saying goodbye. Rude, yes, but amusing in the way that people watching can be. Still, they silently thanked her for another place to look. The groundskeeper's office was further away from the rest of campus, near where the dragon seemed to be kept. They wouldn't have thought to look here if they hadn't overheard that conversation. It frankly looked more like someone's small cottage in the woods than anyone's office space. It reminded Mal of the house they lived in when they were a child. It seems like a place from the past, just like me and Mal thought. Entering revealed that struggle must have happened here. Hoes and rakes and shears of all kinds knocked over into the ground, bags of fertilizer broken open, a small filing cabinet knocked over. That confirmed to Mal that they were looking in the right place and aligned with the file saying the death was unnatural. But outside of the sign of struggle, they couldn't see any obvious clues, at least not yet. There was no noticeable blood or weapon. There was nothing to do but to thoroughly scan the areas, looking through everything bit by bit. Given that some of it involved fertilizer, Mal admitted was not looking forward to the experience. Death had dulled their senses, but even when moving through something, they could still feel it. If they had to describe it, it would be like touching something with very thin gloves on. Under a pile of fertilizer, which Mal was pretty certain was supplied by the dragons based off the distinct smell of it being burnt in process, they found a ring. As Mal inspected it and brushed away the fertilizer, they realized this was clearly a noble's ring. Its crest meant to help with identifying its owner and pressing down wax seals. This one appeared to be green, the shape of a raven with a snake in its mouth. Perhaps they were a newer house because it was not a noble crest from Mal's time, although it had been a time of war, so he should not be surprised by regime change. But Mal was certain too that whoever owned this ring would want it back. They'd perhaps even come looking for it, which meant waiting around here could yield results. It would also be an excuse to stay away from the underworld. They'd wait for a few hours at least before inspecting the other locations. So they planted themselves by the door, watching as the world outside moved and buzzed. Soon the sun set in purples and oranges and very few people around. Maybe a couple of rowdy wizards walking home from drinking at most. Mal listened to the sound of nothing, which wasn't really nothing. There was always something alive, crickets, birds, and the distant noise of dragon chirping. They played with the ring in their hand. It was nice to have something tangible here, to feel tangible, to feel the cold of the metal against their dead hand. Someday they would be alive again, and the first thing they would do was eat a good piece of bread. With just enough butter and enjoy a night with like this, with the wind gently blowing, enough for the cool, not enough to ruin their own hair. And then they felt suddenly like they were being pulled somewhere else from their moment of relaxation. It made them feel a kind of panic Mal hadn't felt since they were alive. What was this? It felt like a vortex around their soul, like they're being pulled away by an invisible ocean tide in the fabric of existence. To their great annoyance, the ring slipped between their fingers. Mal found themselves suddenly ripped from where they were to standing in the living room of someone's quarters. Beneath them, a magic circle and a skeleton of a young man. They took note of him now, unconscious and on the ground. Likely the spell rebounded on him, and they would have to wait several minutes before Mal could demand explanation from him. He had curly orange hair, and one of the loudest looking button-ups they'd ever seen. It was as if the concept of geometry had thrown up on his shirt. He looked too young to be dying so soon. Mao always hated these kinds of reapings. They reminded them of their own death. They frowned. No, he was not dead or dying. They could tell from his breathing, so it was the spell that had summoned them. So it was the spell that had summoned them. A nuisance given that so long as the wizard is alive, Mao cannot speak with them. They can see him starting to stir. Mao wanted to see what he'd do once he wakes. What was he expecting to happen? So held off on his immediate thought to manifest somewhere else. Curiosity was admittedly one of Mao's weaknesses. And I will end there.